Finally, birds are in their breeding plumage. They look like the pictures in the books. And kind of helping us out here, most years the trees aren't fully leafed out. So you have a good chance of seeing the birds. And finally, the weather's generally conducive. It's mild. Some years it's warm. I was telling my wife today, she was talking about how cold it is. I was out one year in early May and it was snowing. So that's the exception to the rule. But usually the weather is conducive to spring birding. Now I want to review some basics. And first question people ask is, where should I go? Well, some of you know that I spend a good deal of my year in along the Gulf Coast in Florida. But I got to tell you, for my money, northeastern Illinois, Cook County, DuPage County, Will County, all the collar counties, because of our forest preserves, our excellent forest preserves, we have a wide variety of habitats located within a short distance of us. We can see a diverse variety of birds. Unlike a lot of places in Florida, these places are free. And again, because of migration, I'm sorry, I guess I was muted. So, punchline, the forest preserves around here are all good. And some of the ones that I think that are located close to your area include Waterfall Glen, Green Valley, and Springbrook Prairie in DuPage County. Lake Whalen Forest Preserve in Will County is very good, especially for ducks. And the Palos Preserves in Cook County are all very good. What you want to look for is an area with mixed habitat, and if there's a water feature, that helps. Yes, you can get out as early in the day as possible. Early in the day for me now is later and later in the morning, but it's never quite disappointing, especially during migration. Recommend you dress for the weather. If you have binoculars, bring them along. A field guide, take a notebook, water and a snack, and let someone know where you're going. Our forest preserves are very safe, but it always helps to let people know that you're going to be out in the field. If you go to the DuPage Birding Club's site, dupagebirding.org, you can hit on birding hotspots and you'll see a page like this. If you click on it again, it can tell you a little bit about the preserves, a little general description, an overview of the habitat, and other hints about how to enjoy your time at the preserve. If you're going to get binoculars, if you don't already have a pair, like I said, 735s, 842s are the recommended power sizes. I know one year I went out to buy a pair of binoculars, the pair that I have in this photo called Incidental, and on Amazon, all the places wanted to sell me 10 powers, 12 powers, 15 powers, 20 powers. Way too much power for bird watching. So keep it about 7 magnification or 8 magnification. The hardcore brands, the Swarovskis over there, yes, that was a retirement present to myself, and I do use those when I go out to do some, I would call it very serious birding, like the kind I'm going to talk about later on. Nikon makes a very, very good comparable pair of binoculars for a fraction of the price. The difference in what you see, well, for me at least, the difference is negligible. I do have a pair of low power binoculars, the Bushnells that I use quite often, mostly for insect work. And then the incidental pair, I take a lot now because when I go out, I usually have a camera, sometimes several cameras, and 3 or 4 lenses on me. And the weight of it's a little overbearing with the hardcore binoculars. So the incidental binocular is just a fraction of the weight. But use what you have. Field guides are a help, especially for beginners. I do have apps. I have Merlin on my phone. I have the Audubon app on my phone. I've used them, but I find that an old-fashioned paper and ink field guide, the kind George can help you find in the library, is a good start, especially if you're a beginner. Suppose you saw this bird out in the field. It's kind of a greenish yellow. You can see it has black wings, has a couple wing bars, stripes on its wings. If you saw it, you could tell it's a little smaller than the sparrows we're familiar with. So if you look into the field guide, you might find something like this and a description of the birds. And the one in that photograph most closely matches the female American goldfinch. Well, let's get started with the birds. Right in the weeks before this big day, the winter visitors are still in our area and other birds begin migrating through. And then, of course, there's some birds that are permanent residents. One of the birds that sticks around usually to the middle of April is the dark-eyed junco. It's a sparrow that lives up along the Hudson Bay area in Canada, and it comes down to our area to spend the winter. In fact, it's one of its nicknames is snowbird, which is what some of the people in Florida call those of us who come down and spend our winters in Florida. But it's a small gray bird. This happens to be a female. The male would be much darker. Pink bill, little white underneath. If you put out a bird feeder this winter, I'm sure you had a few juncos visiting it. Another bird that shows up for a few weeks early in the season in April is the brown creeper. I have many photographs of the brown creeper. I have to be careful because even I lose sight of the bird. It's so well camouflaged. It's a tiny bird, smaller than a sparrow. You can tell it has that really fine beak, brown and white on top, a little white underneath. Generally, it lands towards the bottom of a tree and begins creeping up along the bark, probing cracks in the bark for insects, insect eggs, cocoons, that sort of thing. If you get out to the water in late March, April, you might see this bird, the common loon, larger than our mallard duck. You can tell it's very distinct, isn't it? It's got that black and white checkerboard pattern on its back, black head, and that little white ring around its collar, I guess. Maybe. Another little bird you'll see out there is pied-billed grebes. They're much smaller than the loon, and in fact, even smaller than the mallard. They're like the loon, they're diving birds. They'll disappear under the water and 2 or 3 minutes later pop up, sometimes 100 yards or more from where you saw them go down. If you look at that bill, it's very distinct. It has that black ring around it. A duck that shows up in our area in the spring, early spring, is the blue-winged teal. We have the female, which is what a duck is. A duck is a female duck, and the male, which is a drake. And the male is very distinctive. It has a kind of a blue head and that white patch in front of its eye. Quite often, you'll see pairs of them or small flocks, maybe half dozen, 10 birds. Starting about the middle of February and going through sometimes even the middle of April, and later you might hear sandhill cranes passing overhead. These are large birds, larger than a goose, for example. They fly through the air with their head extended and their feet dragging, and they bugle to each other. And quite often, you'll see them kind of seem to pause in the air and spiral around and round and go up, up, up higher. They nest as close to us as Lake County, McHenry County, parts of Kane County. Every once in a while, they do nest in northern or northwestern DuPage County. But I had a friend of mine over at College of DuPage, which some of you know is dead center in DuPage County, and 3 or 4 of them showed up last week walking around the entrance to the main teaching building. So that was quite unusual. And I actually then have seen a flock within the last week. So they're still on the move, but they're always a nice bird to see in early spring, late winter. Eastern phoebes show up in April. They're a songbird, and I know they look a little nondescript. They're a flycatcher, so they have a habit of flying off their perch, hunting for insects, flying around, and sooner or later, they generally return to a perch site and stay there. As the weather gets warmer, as it actually passes from March into April, savanna sparrows show up in our grassy areas. Sparrows are little brown birds. They're the bane of the bird watcher, not only because they're hard to identify if you're a bird watcher, but if people know you're a bird watcher, sooner or later they'll come up to you and say, I saw this little brown bird today. What was it? The savanna sparrow, if you get a good look at it, you can tell it has that kind of yellow eyebrow, and that's a good field mark to identify one of these in the field. Well, we're getting very close to a perfect time of year for us. You can tell from this map that historically May 6th has been the average peak migration date here in the Chicago area. One of the things that's kind of changing it and making it a little harder to predict is, quite frankly, the warming of the climate. There were days back in March when we were in Florida when it wasn't too much difference between what the high was here in DuPage County and what the high was in Naples, Florida. And of course, we're supposed to have frost tonight, so it goes back and forth. But here's the interesting thing. Some birds migrate from far, far distances, while others are fairly close. For example, when I'm in Florida, I see a lot of some of the birds I'm going to show you later on. Red-winged blackbird, for example, palm warbler are two that come to mind. Killdeer. These birds tend not to migrate very far. Even robins don't migrate very far. They go just about as far south as they need to go to find food, which isn't usually very far, and they stay there. When the weather starts warming, they can move further north. They're taking advantage of the weather. Also, remember, migration takes a lot out of the birds. It's a lot of energy. So the close distance migrants kind of take advantage of that. But then there's far distant migrants, and that would include many of the warblers we're going to be seeing next couple of weeks. They go down to Central America, Northern and South America, the rainforest, and what times them are the length of day. So when the days start getting longer, they start going north. And that kind of helps with the predictability, but it also causes some problems for the birds that I'll hope to talk about later on. So one day in May, every year there is what's called a spring bird count. And it's county by county here in Illinois. It's been going on since the early 1970s. And what happens is that DuPage County is divided into districts, and then individual birders or teams of birders are given sites they're asked to visit. So the year I went to these three, well, I guess 5 places. Lambert Lake Nature Preserve, Manor Woods Park, Lake Ellen, Forest Hill Cemetery, and my house. And all of these are essentially in Glen Ellen, just a little south of Roosevelt Road to up about St. Charles Road. So it's not a very big area. In fact, if you look at a map, this is where I went. And he starts up here. This is Forest Hills, way at the top. I can't even see it. It's Forest Hill Cemetery, then Lake Ellen Park. The other star it's by Glenbard West High School. That's actually the Galt Sanctuary, named for Benjamin Galt, an amateur bird watcher who made a lot of contributions to our knowledge of not only Illinois birds, but birds in general. The star in the middle, that little blue thing's my house. The other star is Manor Hill Park, and then Lambert Lake. Lambert Lake is an amazing spot. It's not very large. Till very recently, it has not received a lot of attention from bird watchers. I've been going there for, I want to say 40, that makes me 30, maybe 45 years. And for its size, for the attention it's received, it's probably one of the best birding spots in DuPage County. However, I don't know if an avid bird watcher would really want to go there because on any given day it can be pretty slow. But on a good day, you can see a variety of things. I know Canada geese aren't particularly exciting, but I've been birding Glen Ellen and DuPage County long enough to remember when Canada geese were quite rare down here in the late 60s. And it wasn't until the early 70s we began to see them in numbers. And then there's the mallard duck. Again, a bird not too many people get excited about. If you're a beginning bird watcher, I think it's a good bird for you to get to know because it's a bird you can compare other birds to. You could say, well, it was about the size of a mallard, or it was a duck, but it looked this or that way, different or similar to a mallard. And of course, there were mourning doves. One of my favorite birds, only because just about everywhere I've gone in the United States, there have been mourning doves, and kind of like an old friend welcoming you every time I go someplace. The killdeer were there, and of course, these are an easy bird to, I think, identify because they tell you their name, killdeer, killdeer. If you get a moment to look at them, you can tell they have that red eye ring, that white-black collar, the white underbelly. They're about the size of a robin, a little longer legged. They're a shorebird. And the interesting thing about a lot of shorebirds is we see them on the shore during the winter looking for food in the Gulf Coast area, but they actually migrate north and nest up in Canada around some of the plains ponds up there. Double-crested cormorants were also at Lake Ellen. These are all Lake Ellen birds, by the way. Some people get a little disgusted with cormorants. In fact, they're mentioned in Paradise Lost. Milton associates them with Satan, but they were one of the birds that were very much affected by various pollutants in water, especially in Lake Michigan and other Great Lakes, caused a lot of deformities. But since the water has been cleared up a little bit, they've made a great comeback. At this point, I want to tell you something, and some of you have heard me say this before. Birds have wings and they don't read books. So you're always safe saying, I saw this bird and the range map says it's found here, but I thought it was this bird and the range map says it's not found here. Well, take a second look and maybe if you can photograph them. Here are 3 cormorants I saw this day in May during the spring bird count at Lambert Lake. The two on the one in the center, the one on the right, are double-crested cormorants. But the one on the left is a little bit smaller. Its tail is proportionately longer. Its beak's proportionately shorter. It's what's called a neotropic cormorant. It's the kind of cormorant you might see in Louisiana, say in New Orleans, and then further west along the Gulf. But they're very, very unusual up here. This particular bird spent the spring and the summer mixing with the double-crested cormorants at Lambert Lake. It did not return the following year. I also saw what is probably the most common hawk in DuPage County, the red-tailed hawk. And you can see here, this is a good example of why it's called the red-tailed hawk. It's a soaring hawk, and they spend the winter here quite often. This pair, this one, for example, nests at the country club or the golf course across the street from Lambert Lake, but includes Lambert Lake in its hunting grounds. Another bird that includes Lambert Lake in its hunting grounds is the great blue heron. It's probably the largest commonly seen bird here in DuPage County. Herons are wading birds. This one's probably in about 2 feet of water. They'll eat pretty much whatever they can catch. I've seen photographs of them eating things such as muskrats. I've seen photographs of them eating alligators. They're very cautious and very stately when they hunt. They wade through the water slowly, looking for anything they can catch. They don't nest at Lambert Lake, but they do come there from their colonies, and there are several colonies throughout DuPage County. and one or two of them will show up almost every day to hunt the lake. Another bird that does that slightly smaller is the great egret. It's an all-white heron. You can see it has that little green area in between its eye and its yellow bill. Again, it's a long-legged wader. One of the things that help you tell a flying heron from, say, a crane is cranes will fly with their necks outstretched. Herons might fly with their names outstretched from a very short distance, but this particular one, on long distances, all herons kind of fold their necks back. So here's an example. This is a crow-sized heron, the green heron. They do nest at Lambert Lake. They're a very cautious bird. They'll be walking around the lake or walking along a stream sometime, and you'll hear it squawk. Suddenly it jumps almost out and right in front of you and flies away. This one's neck is partly stretched, but it's going back into the S shape. There are a number of woodpeckers that show up at Lambert Lake. This is one of the ones that you should be familiar with, the northern flicker. It's relatively large for a woodpecker in this area. You can see that black mustache it has, as well as that red nape on the back of its head. Probably the most common woodpecker around here anymore is the red-bellied woodpecker, which people want to call it the red-headed woodpecker, and I absolutely understand why. The red belly only shows up on males for a short period of time in the spring. But if you see this black and white checker pattern on the back and the red kind of cap and neck, that's a red-bellied woodpecker, and they're fairly large. And then another woodpecker, excuse me, is the downy woodpecker. It's our smallest woodpecker, about the size of a house sparrow, maybe a little bit larger. This is a male. You can see it has that little red top notch. And again, it was very, there's always a couple pairs nesting around Lambert Lake. I didn't photograph this chickadee at Lambert Lake, but they're there. It's the black-capped chickadee. And again, if you had a bird feeder out this winter, you may have had these coming. The little black throat, black cap, the white cheeks. And like the killdeer, it tells you its name, chickadee, chickadee, chickadee. Kind of related to the black-capped chickadee is the white-breasted nuthatch. And it's white underneath, gray on top, white cheek, black cap. In some ways, it resembles the chickadee. Its beak's a little bit larger. It's a little larger, heavier built bird. One of the things about nuthatches is that quite often you'll see them spiraling down the tree head first, and that's how they hunt for insects. They start at the top and they work to the bottom. The creeper, remember, starts at the bottom and works to the top. Swallows start showing up in our area end of April, beginning of May, and the northern ruffed-winged swallow is one of them. I was surprised I got as close as I did to a pair of them. How to describe a swallow? They're a slender bird that you can see. It has a relatively short beak. It's also relatively wide, if you could see it from the top, because they fly through the air catching insects. Otherwise, it's basically brown on top, kind of creamy white underneath. Much more common at Lambert Lake and a lot of places in DuPage County is the tree swallow that I saw at Lambert Lake. And it's a beautiful little bird. It's built like the ruffed-winged swallow, but it's white underneath, and it's kind of this iridescent metallic blue on top. Very beautiful little bird. And quite often, if there's a birdhouse that was put out for bluebirds, you'll see tree swallows have moved in. They kind of come into the area and take over birdhouses around the lake earlier than bluebirds. I've had these in my yard the last week or two, ruby-crowned kinglets. They're tiny birds. They're about the size of a chickadee, maybe even smaller, kind of an olive gray green. I was happy with this photograph because you'd see the ruby crown that gives it its name. But really, I want you to notice that it has that white eye ring, and that's a real clear distinguishing feature. And closely related to them, very similar in size, are the golden crown kinglets. This is the female. You can see she has a yellow crown. A male would have a yellow crown or yellow edge to its crown, but kind of an orange-red crown. And you'll notice it doesn't have an eye ring, or at least here in this one, it might appear to have one, but it's not very distinct. Oops. We have a number of wrens in DuPage County. This is the most common, the house wren, and I hear them more often than I actually see them. They have a warbling song. If you have a phone, you can download the app. Merlin has a sound identification feature that's quite good, and you can hear many recordings of the house wren, and that can help you identify them. Another nice feature about the Merlin identification app is that you can turn it on and it can listen for birds around you. And I got to confess, at my age, I don't always hear as much as I should or notice things that I should. And the Merlin app alerts me to what I should be looking for. I have to mention the European starling. It's a bird people love to hate. It's a little smaller than the robin. In the springtime, they're actually kind of attractive. They're kind of a metallic blue and flecks. The males have these bright yellow bills. They have a very ungainly call, squawking kind of call. Where I live, I haven't seen them in my yard, in my neighborhood, in the 40 years I've lived here. I can go 4 blocks south to Roosevelt Road, and they're all along Roosevelt Road, but they haven't come into the neighborhoods until this year. And I was kind of puzzled by it. And then I was watching them, and guess what else is coming this year? Cicadas. And as and I've watched the starlings many times in my yard, my neighbor's yard. They walk across the lawn and they're starting to stalk the cicadas as they come to the surface. The cicadas quite haven't emerged yet. They're an inch or two from the top of the lawns. At least that's what I've discovered while I've gardened. But the starlings are here eating the cicadas. So, of course, there's blue jays, blue-white. You can see the crest. Blue jays love acorns. Wherever there's an acorn tree, you're going to see blue jays. Then there's some more unusual birds. For example, this is a member of the thrush family. It's related to robins. It's a Swainson's thrush. You'll notice, I guess, I chose this because it was the photograph I had that was in sharpest focus, but it's built like a robin, smaller than a robin, much shyer than a robin. You can notice this throat. It's kind of a buffy colored throat and some of the speckling. And of course, the American robin. And again, if you're a beginner, don't disregard robins. They're a great bird to compare things to. They help you with identification. They can help you with behavior. And the robins in our area are very approachable compared to a lot of wild birds. There's a whole group of birds called mimic thrushes, closely related to robins and other thrushes, but they're not in the same group. And the gray catbird is the one we see and hear the most often in DuPage County. It's a gray bird, a black cap. It's called the catbird because one of its calls really does sound like a cat meowing. They tend to be secretive. But I almost every spring and start seeing and hearing them. And almost every time I go to Lambert Lake, no matter what time of year it is, I see them. And I should point out that these birds are what I saw at Lambert Lake, but I saw them at some of the other places too. And of course, the house sparrow, one of the birds, again, you should know this is the male. It's a good basis of comparison. They're not very common at Lambert Lake, but I saw a few, so I included them. The house finch is a native bird, but it's not native to our area. Um, Long story how they got here, but basically uh, they were a west coast bird. They were trapped in the 1930s. Some of them were taken to New York to be sold in the pet trade. When the dealer realized he had these birds that were illegal for him to possess, he let them go. Well, they've slowly spread their way from New York City out and west. At the same time, for reasons unknown, the native population began spreading east. So at this point, except for, let's say, along the Mississippi River, the central part of the country, they've pretty much covered the whole North American area, at least the United States. I see these and hear these a lot in the spring, in April and May, but about the beginning, middle of June, they seem to disappear. They're still around, but they become a lot more inconspicuous. A bird that does just the opposite is the American goldfinch. This is the male. It's remember the female photograph I showed you earlier. This is a male in breeding plumage. Hard to mistake him for anything else. He's a small bird, smaller than the house sparrow, but bright yellow with a little black forehead and the black wings, and he has a black tail. Well, I mentioned the little brown bird, and so here's a little brown bird. And someone might look at it and say, well, that's a sparrow. I've had led field trips with beginners who've argued this is a sparrow. So one of the things you need to do is not just the overall appearance of the bird, but consider its size, bill shape. Look for anything that kind of sticks out. Eyebrows, wing bars, streaks, nose streaks. Note the habitat. Here in DuPage County, 21 species of sparrows alone have been recorded. Some of you might recognize this bird. It's a female red-winged blackbird. Here's our most common native sparrow. It's a year-round resident, the song sparrow. Its real distinguishing mark is that dark spot in the middle of its breast, a little stick pin. A sparrow that migrates through is called the white-throated sparrow. You can see the white throat. Also notice that little yellow area. And it's called here, well, let's put it this way. In New England, they say it sings Old Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. But I have friends in Canada, and they tell me, no, 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 it sings, Oh, Sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. But always glad to see these sparrows. A little less common during migration is the white crowned sparrow. This one I actually photographed not at Lambert Lake, but at the cemetery. And it looks a little similar, I know, to the white-throated sparrow, but notice the doesn't have that little yellow area. It has a white eyebrow crown. The throat's not quite as white, and it's slightly larger. It's a bird that actually becomes much more common the further west you go. And of course, the red-winged blackbird, the male, actually, for those of us who are bird watchers, the red-winged blackbirds are a better sign of spring than robins. There's always a few robins sticking around, but red-winged blackbirds tend to disappear during the winter and start showing up sometime in February. They're a near-distance migrant, so they only go as far south as they have to go. Another blackbird is the common grackle. It's a large bird with a very unattractive sound, and I should go back to that one. Whoops. They're usually seen in groups, not just pairs, but groups. I find them most commonly on office parks and open areas like that. A bird that I come to respect is the brown-headed cowbird. It's a parasite. That is, it lays its eggs in other birds' nests. That's because before there were cattle in North America, the cowbirds followed the bison to eat the insects stirred up by the bison. That didn't make for a good nesting experience. So the females started laying their eggs in other birds' nests. People might not recognize orioles as blackbirds, but they are, and this is our most common species, the Baltimore oriole. It's named the Baltimore oriole because It's orange and black, which were the colors of Lord Baltimore, of who was given Maryland by the Crown. In the fall, it's going to look quite different, but in the spring, the orange and black make it very easy to identify. A lot of bird watchers are only really interested in going out in the spring and seeing warblers. And there are so many warblers. We have 37 species reported from the county. I don't even know off the top of my head how many we have in North America. I would say 50 or so. And then, of course, you go to Central and South America, there are other warbler species. In the spring, the males, and most of them are very brightly colored. The trouble is, they're small and highly active, and they tend to be in the tree canopy, right at the very top. You can see this chestnut-sided warbler, and the chestnut siding that gives its name. Another warbler, actually one that spends the year with us, is the yellow warbler, and this is the best photograph I've ever been able to take of one. They're a yellow bird with chestnut streaking. Females are a little duller in color. They're birds of kind of open areas, so or shrubby areas, and they have a song that's sometimes transcribed as "Sweet, sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet." One of the first warblers to arrive is the yellow-rumped warbler, and you can see where it gets its name. In the fall, it will look very different, but the yellow rump will still be there. Another early arrival is the palm warbler. I've gotten to be very fond of palm warblers only because they tend to spend the winter months in the Gulf Coast area. In fact, they're the only small bird I commonly see when I'm in Florida. This one's in a male in breeding plumage. You can tell he's yellow. He has a kind of a chestnut forehead. They're a ground bird, though. And one of the distinguishing characteristics is they kind of shake their tail or wag their tail as they hunt for insects. Black and white warblers are, as the name suggests, black and white. They're also like the nuthatch and the brown creeper. They tend to hang out on tree bark and look for insects in the crevices. Pine warblers tend to be a little nondescript, yellowish, olive green in top, gray at the back. But the name is a real clue because everyone I've ever seen has been in a pine tree. And the books will tell you that they're just very closely associated with pine trees. Probably the most common warbler in our area, starting in May and going right through September, is the common yellowthroat. This is a male. Most warblers leave our area, but the yellowthroat remains in our area to breed. Not all warblers kind of look like warblers. This is an ovenbird that I saw, but the day I was birding, but this photograph was taken at Lake Whalen. It's a ground bird. It looks a lot like a thrush, but you'll notice it has that kind of a reddish top knot there in the black marking, and it kind of creeps through the underbrush. Another warbler doesn't look much like a warbler is actually called the northern water thrush because it does look like a thrush. And this was at Lambert Lake, hunting the edge of the lake, looking for insects. And I imagine even water animals, maybe snails, whatever, that it could get to. Of course, then there's the Illinois state bird that if I don't see it when I go out looking for birds, I get a little worried. This is the northern cardinal, male in breeding plumage. Naturally, when I take photographs like this, there's always something in the way. So, and that was my day in May, really. But a week or two later, other birds started showing up. And summer breeders tend to arrive a little bit later than the birds that are migrating through. And every species arrives when food and breeding sites are available. One theory now about migration is that most of the birds that migrate were tropical birds that left the tropics during their breeding season to find food. And when the breeding season is over, they return to the tropics. So some of the birds I saw were wood ducks. This is a male. It's probably a very distinct duck and maybe the most beautiful one in North America. This is common at Lambert Lake and many of the other lakes. Caspian terns. This is a bird you might think is a gull, but you'll notice that bright red bill, and they tend to behave differently from gulls. You know, gulls will land in the water and swim, and I don't think I've ever seen a Caspian tern do that. They'll soar over a pond, lake looking for fish. When they see some, they fold their wings and they dive in after it. Eastern kingbirds show up. They're related to phoebes. They're flycatchers. They're a little bit smaller than a robin, but they're very dark gray on top and white underneath. They're very brave birds. They'll chase after hawks. They'll chase after other kingbirds. Every once in a while, they'll chase after a bird watcher if you get too close to their nest. Red-eyed vireos quite often are seen more easily than heard. They have a kind of a robin-like song, but unlike the robin, they keep repeating it over and over and over. If you go to a wooded area during the peak heat of summer, you may hear the red-eyed vireo singing. It might be the only bird singing. Barn swallows show up. They're kind of easy to tell. They have that swallow tail. They're blue on top. They have that red throat. Here's one gathering mud to build its nest. Eastern bluebirds, of course, show up. A thrush, a relative of the robin. Bobolinks show up in open areas. They're a threatened grassland bird. It's interesting how they show up, breed, and then by July, quite often they're already to start migrating south to Argentina. A bird that you might find even in your own backyard is the chipping sparrow. It's a very small sparrow. Notice it's not streaked underneath. It has a white eyebrow. It has that black line through its eye and has that red, orangish chestnut top knot. Roger Torrey Peterson said this, and I think it's worth repeating, that birds are just more than ducks and grouse in a sportsman's bag, cardinals and jays to brighten the garden, or shorebirds and warblers to be ticked off on a birder's checklist. They are indicators of the environment, sort of an ecological litmus paper. An early warning system tells us when things are out of phase. And I talk about this in another presentation I do about insects. A lot of the animals that we are concerned about saving, really, if they disappeared from the environment, wouldn't have a huge effect on the environment. Insects, if they disappeared, would. However, the point Roger Torrey Peterson's making here is absolutely critical, that they are key indicators. So like I said earlier, if I don't see cardinals, I'm kind of asking myself, why aren't there cardinals here? There should be cardinals here. One of the things that's affecting a lot of birders' ability to find birds is the flora. And birds depend on oak trees more than we can imagine. Why? Because oak trees are prime host plants for insects. And during migration, many birds depend on the caterpillars, especially moth caterpillars they find on oak trees. Well, the oak forests are disappearing in our area. A lot of the trees that communities plant are really not native. They don't host anything. The ginkgo tree is a good example. I have Norway maples in my yard. I didn't plant them, but they were planted. In fact, one of the trees, the tree in the boulevard, is planted by the village. It's a Norway oak. I've lived in this house for 40 years, and I've never seen any evidence of anything eating its leaves. So that's a bad sign. On the other hand, I do have a friend who's kind of a moth specialist, and he told me recently that he's heard reports, not published, but he's heard reports that there may be as many as 4 species of moths that eat the leaves of Norway maples. Compare that to the 500 species that eat the leaves of white oaks.
John, I think we lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, John.
Yeah, I keep losing. Yeah, I've gotten that message many times. Okay, so these are some of the birds you can see in predominantly oak woodlands. The blue jay's one, rose-breasted grosbeak, has a beautiful song. It's been described like a robin with voice lessons. Scarlet tanager has been described as a robin with a sore throat. This is a male. The wood thrush probably has the most beautiful song of any songbird in our area, but it's only found in large forested areas, areas of the Arboretum, for example, areas at Waterfall Glen. Towhees are found in more open areas. This one was found at, I'm trying to think where I was. They have a real clear song. It's chawink, chawink, or drink my tea, drink my tea. They're a sparrow, even though they don't look like your typical sparrow. One of the things you can do to attract birds to your yard in the summer, of course, is to plant native plants. A lot of organizations now are having native plant sales. I recommend going to those rather than to a garden center. A lot of the plants in garden centers have been treated at some stage with pesticides that make them lethal to bees and other pollinators. A lot of them are hybrids that really don't produce a lot of nectar, if any. If you go to audubon.org/plants, you'll be able to enter your zip code and they can give you, you'll generate a list of plants that are good for your area. And there's some other places that you can go to for some advice. The DuPage Birding Club, of course, both the website and on Facebook. I have a website I call a Facebook site I call John's Nature for All. It's a little more diverse, a little more general, but it deals with all sorts of aspects of nature. ebird.org is a good site. inaturalist.org, another good site. And I would be remiss to point out that nothing beats going to the library and checking out the books at the library. So this is my use of eBird. The day I went, I saw 35 species, 149 individuals. How long was I there? I was there for 2 hours. Notice the description: clear but cold, 30 degrees. Toads not calling. Year or two before, toads were everywhere. And I'd like you to remember that bird watching keeps you sharp, gives you a purpose in nature, helps you think and unwind, and most of all, bird watching is fun. So I really want to thank you for inviting me. And sooner or later, we'll run across each other in the field. But I hope you take advantage of the warming weather the next few weeks. Even if you go out and just walk around your neighborhood, you'll be surprised at how much you might be able to see and hear. Okay, now,
Great.
see, I got a question.
Yeah, if anyone has a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and John is going to go ahead and look at those.
Yeah.
So any questions, feel free to type them in.
Wait, there's Kathy Luchinsky. Kathy and I go way back. I wonder if Kathy's still at COD. What sort of bird seed do I recommend?
Oh, and John, everyone can see the questions, so feel free to
Okay.
verbally answer them.
Okay, what sort of bird seed do you recommend? Well, I'm typing in sunflower seed as a crowd pleaser. I try to avoid Milo seed. It looks like a orange BB. It's a filler in a lot of the less expensive blends. But if you can get something with sunflower seed, millet, those are good. Really, cracked corn's good. I used to use a lot of sunflowers, shellless sunflower seeds, but I discovered that chickadees like it in the shell. What's the best place to see scarlet tanagers? To any place with a high concentration of oak trees is good. Morton Arboretum's good. Elson's Hill in Winfield is good. Last year, though, the only scarlet tanager I saw was in my backyard. Do I recommend bird feeders? So I generally only feed the birds in fall and winter. I generally feed the birds in fall and winter, and I know people have very good arguments for not feeding the birds at all. And I don't disagree with that. During the summer months, I feed the hummingbirds, and it supplements what they feed. I don't, you know, that's a debatable question with a lot of people. Do I recommend it? If you want to do it, fine. I've come up with a program. I'm working on a program because in the past, when people have said this has happened, that has happened, I kind of gave them answers that really I'm learning more and more probably is only half the story. And I'll just give you a for instance. The typical lawn in our area is 56-60% non-native plants. Chickadees tend not to breed in areas that have more than 30% native plants. So people put out birdhouses to say, I don't see any birds. That's not your fault. The birds aren't there. They might come to your house during the winter for the feeder, but they're not going to stay around to nest. Kathy's asking me, can you hear me, George?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm just going to do this. I did not see any red-breasted nuthatches at my feeder this year. Was this true for your house and others? I did not see any red-breasted nuthatches, Kathy. But there's two parts to it. We have a place in Florida, and we went down at the end of September and essentially stayed through the middle of December. When I came back, I started putting seed in my bird feeders, and I got a few birds, but I did not have the number of birds at my feeder this winter than I've ever had in the past. So I don't know what, I hope it was an anomaly. I hope it's because I go back and forth and I don't feed birds continuously. Uh, but no, I did not see any red-breasted nuthatches, and I haven't seen very many white-breasted nuthatches, although I do hear them. Kathy's reminding us that crushed peanuts work well, especially for blue jays. She also thinks St. James Farm is a good place for scarlet tanagers. Actually, was it last year? I saw a mockingbird at St. James Farm. It's a bird I'm very familiar with. Okay, Larry's asking me, I have heard that birds become dependent on feeders and then you can't stop putting feed out. I don't know if that's really true. I think the big concern with bird feeders is that possibly they spread disease if you're not careful about cleaning them periodically. I also tend to think that our bird feeders complement what they're eating, not entirely replacing it. But it's again, I know people who would argue very strongly the point Larry's trying to make, that birds become dependent on bird feeders and therefore don't use them. I can only tell you this: the Laboratory of Ornithology at Cornell University, which is probably the primary bird study school in the country, has a program they call Feeder Watch, which relies on people watching their bird feeders. So Cornell University ornithologists do not discourage feeding birds. Gail is asking, do I have a favorite native plant or a few go-tos? Why, yes, Gail, I do. And my favorite native plant, probably for birds, is the purple coneflower. Although you can get them in different colors and there's different species. I think there's 3 or 4 species of coneflowers we've seen on the Kurt prairie at College of DuPage. I also like bee balm or monarda. In my garden, the scarlet monarda is the plant that really attracts the hummingbirds. And sometimes they'll go to the monarda in preference to the bird feeder, the hummingbird feeder. I've become very concerned about insects. I have a program about the decline of insects throughout the world, especially the developed parts of the world. And to that end, I recommend almost any native plant. Monarch butterflies, of course, are getting a lot of attention. There's at least 2 or 3 groups here in DuPage County dedicated to helping monarch butterflies. So native milkweed, let me stress native milkweed, including the common milkweed, is a good plant. Milkweed's a kind of amazing plant to begin with. So, but those are all good. And again, if you go to audubon.org I can't say it now, /plants, they'll give you a lot of good recommendations. National Wildlife has a website. I don't know if it's a .org or a .com or what. I think it's called Gardening for Wildlife, and they'll recommend plants. They'll also, through the site, you can purchase plants. Like I said, I don't recommend buying plants from a garden center. The Forest Preserve District, Morton Arboretum, College of DuPage, a lot of groups are going to have native plant sales over the next few weeks, where you can buy, I'm going to call them safe plants, because they've been raised without the pesticides and the herbicides that are sometimes used in garden center plants. Best time of day to look for birds? Mary, during migration, I guess maybe high noon's not a good time, but I would get out as early in the morning as possible. And, my own experience, around 10:30 in May, things start to slow down. I'm going to be doing the bird count this year on May 4th. I hope to be out in the field by 6 or 6:30. It depends on the temperature. If it's too cold, insects aren't stirring. If the insects aren't stirring, the birds aren't stirring. but and I'm generally done about noon. And those 5, 6 sites I showed in my earlier in the program, I was able to cover all 4 of them, 5 of them in about 4 hours. So Donna wants to know, can attracting birds to your yard lead to window collisions? There's been a lot of publicity about window collisions. The DuPage Birding Club just had a speaker from a group here in Chicago that monitors and tries to help birds with window collisions. It can. There's various things you can do to discourage them. I live in an older house. None of my windows are particularly big. And I've lived in this house for going over 40 years. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never had a bird hit the window. My mother had a house in a kind of a area of Lombard that wasn't built up at the time. And she had a front living room window, a picture window, and living room, dining room were attached, and dining room had a picture window. And I know once a flicker hit the window. There's various things you can do. You can cover your window. You can put tape on the window. Another suggestion that I thought was pretty good, now that I'm thinking about it, was be careful where you put your feeder. If you place it close to the window, birds aren't going to hit the window hard enough. If they hit the window, are not going to hit it hard enough to have, for it to be fatal. And Gail's telling me her heated bird bath attracts birds all year. Yes, they do. I enjoy watching my bird bath during the summer, and it's a very nice way to sit in the shade, see what shows up, what doesn't show up. Thank you for that, Gail. Larry wants to know, do I spend all my time at one location when you go out, or do you visit 2 or 3 sites? Larry, that one day in May was the spring bird count, and I visited a number of sites. Usually I don't. Partly it's I'm not getting any younger, and I noticed that after about an hour or 2 in the field, if I'm walking, and it begins to take a toll. But I generally allow myself 4 hours later on when I go out bird watching, and I divide my time. It has nothing to do with what happens here, but for example, when I go to northwest corner of DuPage County, I go to why can't I think of the name of the big park? I was just there today, or past it today. It has a big hill, but there's a couple areas in North Mallard Lake. That's what I'm trying to think of. Mallard Lake has a couple of big man-made lakes that loons and grebes and some other birds spend their time on. And then West DuPage Forest Preserve, where the West DuPage River runs through, has a big quarry lake. So I can go to both those sites. Usually I go to Mallard Lake first and scan the water there, and then I'll drive over to West DuPage and park the car and scan the water and do a little walking around the lake. But during the bird count, I go to a lot of sites. Larry, you took a group of us on a hike along the Page River. Boy, Larry, you're talking 40 years ago. I think about that sometime. Larry, I can never do that again. Marge Nystrom was with us. You might remember Ms. Nystrom taught biology, and she taught actually she taught both my brothers. So yeah, I'm glad that made an influence on you. Yeah, bird watching is a lifelong hobby, and if you don't look, you don't see. And I've started using a phrase in a book, an author, and I'm sure if George doesn't have the books, he'll get them. They're by Doug Ptolemy, and in his last book, Doug Ptolemy called it The Nature of Oaks, and he has a line in it: our ignorance of nature is a cultural norm. And I find all kinds of examples of that, and it's why I like doing what I do. It's I'm not out there in the field. I'm not on the front lines with a lot of things, but I'm discovering that things I know I share to people I think would have known but don't. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a type of milkweed that's found in Central and South America called tropical milkweed. It doesn't grow year round in our area, but it grows year round in Florida and California. And it's very popular. It became very popular because monarch butterflies love it, but it turns out it has all kinds of bad effects on monarch butterflies. One of which is that there's a parasite that causes trouble at various stages in the butterfly's growth. And I find it kind of ironic in Florida where I am that I'll go to a park and get a pamphlet in the park that tells me not to plant this tropical milkweed, and I'll go out into the park and find it all over the place. Well, I said something to a Facebook Florida butterfly group or monarch butterfly group, and I got all kinds of kickback. There were people who just, quite frankly, if they wear tin helmets or aluminum hats to keep the rays off their head, I wouldn't be surprised. They had all kinds of theories about that. There are lies being spread about tropical milkweed. I don't know why, but I was more surprised that people told me they never heard anything about tropical milkweed. And all you have to do is type tropical milkweed in your browser, and you're going to get all kinds of information about why you shouldn't plant it and why you shouldn't use it. So, any more questions? Larry, thanks for bringing that to mind. I wonder sometimes if it made any effect. So, George, no more questions. Is there anything else you'd like to ask her?
No, it's been a wonderful presentation. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to get out there myself. This is the time. The birds are coming through.
Yeah, George and I have shared that we both have recently become, George a parent, me a grandparent to a puppy. So I'm finding my bird watching opportunities kind of limited in my backyard. So we'll see what happens. I've seen some good birds in my yard. I've gotten both the kinglets so far this year, and of course, most of the sandhill cranes I see in my driveway looking up in the sky. But George, I'd like to make one more thing. If there's any other people here, if you have a chance, if you're going bird watching, you have a chance to make a real contribution to science. And I would encourage you to set up an account at ebird.org and record your sightings. Another thing you could do is set up an account at iNaturalist.org. And it's a little more complicated with iNaturalist because you have to, or you should be using photographs you've taken. But both sites are creating databases. And although I have friends that dismiss them as social media, no different from Facebook or Instagram or anything else, I know there are researchers who use these sites for no other purpose than to study the diversity of the area. I know I personally used information I found on eBird, create a table kind of arrangement comparing the Russell R. Kirk Prairie at COD to say the Morton Arboretum, Schulenburg Prairie, and other sites that get a lot of attention. And what we saw when we crunched some of the numbers was that the Kirk Prairie is a very good site for the attention it received. And I know that the manager of the site was able to use that data in order to secure some funding for the prairie so they can do some of the programs and some of the projects they want to do on the prairie. So, it's, and the nice thing is too, about when you're entering these things, people say, oh, I had a bad day. I only saw this, this, and this. When you're entering data, what you don't see is as important as what you do see. So I urge you to, if you are so motivated, set up an account with eBird or set up an account with iNaturalist, record your findings, and your little bit makes a big difference to the scientist.
John, we have two people that raised their hand
Okay.
to talk. Do you mind if, do you
No.
have another minute or two?
I got time.
Okay, here we go. Kathleen, I'm passing it along to you. Kathleen, do you want to talk? Your microphone is off.
Yes, and no, thank you. I was going to mention when I could not hear John anymore. Nope, I'm good. Hi, John.
Okay,
Hi,
Hi.
Kathy. You still going to
Hi.
Costa Rica with the college, or are you done with that?
Hey, no. You know what? Now that you mentioned, in December, you can come and join me. Tanzania, Africa in December, New Zealand in January, February,
Oh,
and
boy.
Galapagos Islands next summer. I mean, 2025. So come
Well,
on, John, and
yeah,
everybody.
those times of the years, I'm usually in Florida, and B, my wife manages the symphony at COD, and she has concerts. So my life is a little different these days. But thanks. Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah, I just gave a presentation at COD, so
Nice. Well, all right. Thanks for talking to us today. It was great.
thanks, Kathleen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
great. And Diane, I'm gonna allow you to talk now. If you want to turn off or turn on your microphone. Diane, are you still with us? Hello, hello?
I was gonna check off. You couldn't, then they would have asked me to go, hello. Do the same thing. You know, I was just gonna log out a few minutes ago, but
Okay,
you
yeah,
might as-
Diane,
she's gone.
she's gone. Okay. Okay, well, I think that's it then. John, thank you very much. That was an
Thank you,
excellent
George.
presentation. I appreciate it, and we look forward to having you again sometime within the next few months. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone take care. Have a good birding season.
It's so funny.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.